Hello, everybody. Today is Wednesday, October 17th, and we're bringing you Block Digest 133 at block height 546,174. And we have two surprises for everybody today. So, what's going on, strangers? You want to say hi?
Hi, it's good to be here again.
Hey, it's Chris. Good to be back.
And James Bond will be here any second now. What's going on today, Janine?
Well, if I scream during the live cast, there is a moth in the room. It's very big, so that's because it flies in my face.
All right, well, let's hope for no moth attacks, and guess let's just get right to it. So, sure everybody has seen the headlines and the big news about Fidelity launching their Fidelity Digital Asset Services LLC. And yeah, I think there is going to be a big wave of this kind of stuff kicking off. And honestly, looking at a lot of the material they've published, I am definitely not really down about this or agitated. So this LLC is going to be handling both custody of cryptographic assets as well as trading for enterprise clients. And for those who don't know, probably nobody watching, Fidelity manages around $7.2 trillion worth of client assets. So this is definitely a big sign of the attitude of institutions like this. And pretty much the material they publish shows that they're really taking this seriously and not kind of just diving in as well, I hear some buzz around, so maybe we should check this out. I mean, for people who've been watching for a while, Fidelity's been kind of tinkering around with this space for quite a while. Like a few years ago, they actually engaged in mining operations for Bitcoin and Ethereum, and I think they mined something like a few hundred Bitcoin. And some of the material they've published under the digital asset services over the past few days really shows a kind of deep understanding and appreciation for this space that I think is really out of the norm for a lot of the big financial institutions looking around and trying to find a niche in the space. The first one was kind of a breakdown overall of the history kind of digital cash and attempts at systems like this. And they really went and did their homework. Like they broke down the entire lineage from David Chaum's eCash to the proof of work system, Hashcash developed by Adam Back, and then even into the BitGold design by Nick Szabo. The name escapes me right now, but the Wei Dai system. And they've really kind of looked through the entire history of all these things and the iteration from the original Chaumian server all the way to Bitcoin and how these pieces, I almost just said feces, pieces fit together. And, you know, have really looked at all the way down to the foundation, how these things work and why they exist in the first place. It's not just, well, we smell some money here, so let's dive in. They're really orienting themselves to this space and the reasons why. And the second piece that they publish actually looked pretty in depth into the overall history of custody in the financial sector. And kind of broke down all of the different changes in the way the financial system has handled these problems from in the early 20th century, pretty much everybody managing actual paper stocks or bonds or titles themselves, and these kinds of things functioning as a bearer asset, up to the history of the Great Depression, the financial crash of 29, and the increasing overhead and kind of load that really made it unfeasible for this kind of paper-rooted thing to continue as the way things are managed. You know, after the Great Depression, things kind of migrated from actual titles being held by people to those physical pieces of paper being managed by brokerages or holding companies, but still being reconciled in paper, like still having to physically move the paper around, actually file paperwork to register change of custody. And the kind of volumes picking up as the 20th century went on just made this completely impractical in terms of the processing volume, just the amount of paperwork on custody change that had to be maintained. And this eventually led to the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation being set up, which, if anybody pays attention to Bruce Fenton, I'm sure you are well aware of, and his very negative opinion about them. It's pretty much the one company that handles the custodial aspect and kind of the core of changing ownership of assets like this. And just how this has kind of like moved throughout the entire 20th century from actual physical bearer instruments that the holder themselves keep track of and maintains into this heavily centralized system where you have things like the DTCC. You have, I think, 4 major banks, BNY Mellon, JP Morgan, State Street, and Citigroup, kind of functioning as the vast majority of actual custodial holdings of assets like this and processing of change of ownership. And then kind of move on to look at Bitcoin and blockchain systems and how this can fundamentally make this process way more efficient, but also distribute it again and kind of come full circle back to where we were in the early 20th century, where all of these things were effectively bearer instruments that the owner had independent control of, but in an actual digitized, much more efficient way in terms of reconciliation. And the main issue they point out in this is really it comes down to the custody. And in legal terms and in practical terms, institutions can't really just manage their own private keys. I mean, as secure as it would be for a fund to have their own hardware device and manage keys themselves, it creates all kinds of issues of trust. I mean, who's actually going to be managing these things, and how much of a systemic point of failure does this create, to legal reasons, where the funds like this legally cannot manage their own assets, which is a huge part of why we've seen this shift over the course of the 20th century from bearer instruments into these kinds of corporations existing and facilitating all these processes. And so they've really started looking at like how this is going to have to change, like how a custodian handling a digital asset is going to have to structure their services and products, and more importantly, how the legal system is going to have to look at this and maybe differentiate a lot of things from the conventional way of doing things. And kind of breaking things down, they've looked at the differences between a hot and cold wallet, obviously, and the different kind of risk that this entails in terms of asset exposure, and also multi-signature, which, you know, is something that was not possible in any way with any kind of conventional financial asset before Bitcoin came around. And some of the big questions they brought up is kind of like, how do you handle this? Like in a multi-signature key, like for instance, how does the law look at that? Like, who is a custodian there? Is there a custodian? Like, are each of the key holders going to be looked at as equal custodians of an asset? Like, there's just a lot of questions here and a lot of real technical challenges that have to be addressed before these kinds of institutions can come in full swing for both legal reasons and practical reasons. And Fidelity has really been thinking this through. Like, they have been kind of looking at this space for years now before they've decided to dive in. And it's not just a pivot like JP Morgan, where, oh, Bitcoin's a scam, but, oh, wait, let's start looking into this because people seem to be spending a lot of money on it. And so, like, I am generally somebody who wants to see the system maintain its decentralization, maintain its access as far as general users. But I think Fidelity as a company, looking at their presence in the space over the past few years, is somebody who is not going to actively attempt to undermine that. I think that they are really looking, how do they integrate into this space based on what it is, and not actually try to warp it into the kind of legacy environment that they're used to dealing with. So I guess, who's got some thoughts to spit? Because I'm running short of breath.
Yes. Yeah, I'm reading it now. It's one thing that I scanned down to in the Medium post. I guess the link is in the description down below. Is financial custody through time. If you just do a search on the page for that, and it'll give you a model. Let's see if the screen share works actually on my computer. So one of the interesting things here is that this timeline is not quite right, because actually they still need to look after private keys. So actually, if they end up with a paper wallet system, then what will actually happen is that the keys will just be on paper, and then it will be back to the same old model of putting things in vaults again. And in fact, having spoken to quite a number of financial institutions, during my course of my Bitcoin career, I can tell you that they much prefer to look after physical things like a physical HSM, a hardware security module, or think of like a ledger, a Trezor, a Bitbox, or one of these hardware devices. They'd much rather put customers' keys on those and then put those in vaults than kind of have a piece of software running on a special computer that an IT person has access to. So that's something that kind of stood out to me as I was looking through this. And the reason why banks like JP Morgan are jumping in on this, haven't said that it was a scam, is because that's what their customers are demanding. They want the volatility that crypto gives them, a volatility that, by the way, has been diminishing in the legacy finance system. If it's not too pretentious to call it legacy by now, it's that the problem was HFT, that the high frequency trading meant that it was getting harder and harder to make a profit in those markets. It meant that you had to have access to the coders, you had to have access to the servers. Those servers had to be within a certain proximity of the data centers. Then new rules came in after 2008 about the length of cable that you could have. Everyone had to be using the same length of cable from their bot trading servers to the exchange servers. And so it was basically man against machine. If you were trading in the old-fashioned way by looking at charts and doing entry, then you were trading against the software, and it became a race condition. And what cryptocurrency offers is an illiquid market with a lot of demand, a growing demand, I would say, globally. And that offers an opportunity for any new entrants to gain an advantage by applying some of that bot trading techniques to the market in order to get in early, so you can take advantage of the lack of liquidity. So that's why I think these institutions are now currently interested in getting involved. But I think that you're not going to get rid of the key management problems that we have until now. Even if you decentralize it and everyone has to log in to their bank with a share, let's say, of a private key over multi-sig, that still doesn't eliminate some of the problems with key management that I think is going to be very interesting to see evolve over the coming months and years.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's really the core of the issue. I mean, you can't get around that as a point of failure. And so, one of the core issues I see with this, or at least in the long term, is how do you distribute things? Because even if you have like a registered custodian, like something legally approved, something that a lot of these institutions trust, it completely changes the game that whoever in that company is actually managing those private keys could just take everything and disappear. And that is just really something I don't think can be 100% solved purely through something like multi-signature or hardware modules, I think like you're going to have to move into the Bitcoin scripting system and actually look at ways to structure encumbrances so that there are checks on things, so that it's not as simple as whoever has the key can just run away with the money, that there are different layers of control based on the kind of the descending shitstorms that could happen pretty much based on whoever is holding the keys and what they decide to do. And it's not something you can just solve with manage the keys yourself. Like you actually have to combine a key management system with physical access control, with trust, with the actual scripts that you can construct, and like put all of this together in a way where there's something equivalent to checks and balances. Because if you don't, like, what happens when the bank manager decides, fuck it, I'm gonna go retire in South Asia? Poof. But it's going to be really interesting to see because, you know, they're coming and they're trying to solve these problems. All right, though. I guess switching the order up a little bit, Nopara, want to take us through all of these fun tech-related things, which it seems like we don't cover enough?
Sure, I have so many things for today. I was even gonna prove that Coinbase has a pretty good privacy, things like that. But I've been
blasphemy.
I've been upgrading to Bitcoin 7. Did you guys upgrade to Bitcoin 17?
Nah, I just upgraded to 16.3. I'm super lazy when it comes to new versions. I'll get around to it.
Okay, so if you are indexing the chain, then it's going to take 1 hour before or more before your node gets usable. And I was upgrading Wasabi's backend nodes today, and I mean in that half an hour, and I was so afraid it doesn't even give me any feedbacks, things like so. Anyway, my point was that my attention is not perfect now. One of the things I wanted to talk about is Bitcoin Core, and I want to read something from Linus Torvards. Linus Torvalds, for those who don't know, is the creator of Linux kernel operating system, and this is what he had to say to someone in 2012. Mauro, shut the fuck up. It's a bug, all right? In the kernel. How long have you been a maintainer? And you still haven't learned the first rule of kernel maintenance. If a change results in a user program breaking, it's a bug in the kernel. We never ever blame the user programs. How hard it is to understand. These are the arguments of Linus why people should not break other people's code if they are writing a library or Bitcoin Core, because I got a bit of angry. Let's say that Bitcoin Core made so many changes in 17 that it was kind of hard to keep up. I was able to, but I can imagine a lot of people don't. And then I brought up this issue on Bitcoin Core, and I pointed out that at the time of writing, 86% of the Bitcoin network is vulnerable to CVE 20181, the bug that actually could lead to inflation, and it's already like 20 days later or something like that, and still the most of the network is vulnerable. And maybe one of the reason it can be because Bitcoin Core is breaking stuff, and it's not a smooth upgrade. And man, they just just refuse. So I just wanted to bring attention to people who are working on top of Bitcoin Core. Doesn't have such an easy job, because this very simple thing to not break the user program, to not break the API, they just refuse this principle. It's so crazy. You guys have something to add to it?
I mean, I can imagine it would suck, like building something on top of Bitcoin. And I mean, it's a tough balancing act, because there is really a lot to change in Bitcoin before it really becomes too difficult to change things, and things to make more efficient in terms of how it's actually managing access to all the internals. But at the same time, like, that does kind of just set a timer whenever they deprecate things or change things in the RPC or the API, because everybody has stuff built on top of it. And you either have to continue using an outdated version or retool your entire application to actually interact with the new way things are structured. And depending on like how complex your application is or how much is involved in that, that could really be a lot of resource diversion. And I mean, a big company might not really, it might not be a drain on somebody like Coinbase, but part of the whole aspect of Bitcoin is that anybody can build on it. And there are quite a lot of businesses or products built on top of it that are really bare bones. I mean, like the first example I can think of is Ravar, who was actually in that issue in the thread that you posted, who runs a gambling site, Bustabit, and that's literally a one-man business. Like when things like this happen, and I know he seemed to kind of be on the other side of the issue as you, but he's just one person. So whenever things like that happen, like he has to do all of that himself, and then there's nobody else to help. And I mean, there's no real concrete way to kind of look at all of the small operations out there like that who are constantly having to stop what they're doing or new things that they're building out for their application, and then spend time retooling things, or they just have to stay on an old version of core until they have the time to do it. Like it's really, like, from my perspective, it's a hard thing to deal with, because I see like merit on both sides of the issue, and I don't really see a clear cut like conclusion to arrive at in terms of like which should take precedence. You know what I mean?
Many of the changes can be avoided. For example, the sign raw transactions, what they removed in 17 and added another function that actually does the same, but they could just tunnel the other functionality into the old signed raw transaction, and no one else's software would have break. Or estimate fee. When this new estimate smart fee thing came in, then it's you can just support estimate fee and no one's application breaks, or the config files. You could have the same logic plus add the new logic that you have to specify test dot something before some config entries. So this is, I mean, there are just some things that have no excuses. Yeah, anyway, I'm just angry because I was so afraid that something goes wrong while I was upgrading the backends of Wasabi, and it didn't have any feedback. So yeah, maybe this is where it's coming from. Okay. All right.
It's still something worth talking about, man. I mean, like, especially in a space like this, it's some people might dismiss it, and I know a lot of the core developers were kind of arguing like this needs to be done and it won't happen as much in the future, but like it's something that materially affects developers actually building things.
Yeah, that's one thing that right now they are working on multi-wallet support and things like that where changes happen. So it might not going to be like this in the future. It's just still annoying, you know. And Tumblebeat, we don't maintain that software actively, and now people are, because they don't even understand, you know, competent developers doesn't understand what is changing, and we are just too busy to fix the things by ourselves, and they are putting pull requests. Anyway, do you want to go to Janine or
I think you're forgetting the good news you have to announce.
the Coinbase is more private than you think, or what?
A new thing being released.
Oh, of course, Wasabi is released in OS X, and it's
See how
working pretty
excited
well.
Chris just got?
For no particular reason. Just glad that you're like breaking out, you know.
Oh man, but yeah.
So now Steve Jobs can spy on you. It is really interesting, you know. After the beta release of Wasabi 2 months ago, Don said, "Yeah, it's gonna be 2 weeks to do the OS X stuff," and then after 2 weeks, it was 2 weeks again, and then 2 weeks again, and now finally, OS X. I couldn't even believe it. And a lot of OS X users are coming, and now it's just the volume of mixing just went to the roof. It's pretty good. Already over 110 Bitcoin mixed. Yeah, it's Wasabi is picking up. Oh, and I just today before the show, we applied for the CoinJoin bounty. So that's fingers crossed too.
You're here. All right, Janine, are you ready? Cricket?
Yes, sorry. So it's going to be, first of all, another update on this crazy civil thing. In the last 3 shows, I've been reporting on the civil platform and Tokensale. If you're not familiar with that is, just look at the join_civil account on Twitter. Explains what it is, but basically it's supposed to be a decentralized journalism platform. And to the surprise of absolutely no one except for maybe a few of Civil's partners and perhaps even developers, the Tokensale that was supposed to finish on October 15th did conclude. The problem is they only raised about $1.4 million of their $8 million soft cap, which doesn't even begin to approach their $24 million hard cap or their goal. So they were expecting to raise at least $8 million. They didn't even get close. Most of the tokens in the sale were purchased by Consensus last month, which is the venture company run by Ethereum co-founder Joseph Lubin. And the rest of the tokens were bought by somewhere around 3,000 people, according to the CEO of Civil, which means that the average buy was roughly $150 worth of tokens, not a huge amount. And they were apparently surprised enough by the failure of the sale that they didn't even have a public plan for what they would do in the event of the sale not reaching its soft cap. But according to a new Medium post that I think came out yesterday, note that they don't, they're a decentralized journalism platform, but they don't post or host anything on their own infrastructure. They use Medium and all of these other hosting platforms, not exactly indicative of their skills in this area. And the Civil CEO said that they will be doing another sale within weeks. which will be, quote, much simpler. And he says buyers in the initial civil token sale will be able to opt into this new sale, request an immediate refund, or be automatically refunded by October 29th. And one of the things I noticed from his statement is that he stated Consensus has committed $3.5 million to the Civil Foundation. And so I kind of posted this on Twitter because it was unclear to me whether this was 3.5 million in addition to the 5 million that they had received from Consensus back in October 2017, or if they had possibly reduced their commitment after seeing the results of the sale from 5 million to 3.5. And then I found out through some statements that the CEO made in, I think it's Neiman Labs. So he didn't even amend his own post to clarify it. He did a short interview with someone else. So probably a bunch of people are confused. And he clarified that the 3.5 million was not only new funding, but apparently Consensus is planning to use that 3.5 million to buy more tokens. So that's a problem because, if you don't already know, Consensus already controls or had bought into a large percentage of the tokens. And the fact that they're buying more tokens should be a big problem because at the moment they effectively have influence of more than 2/3 of all the tokens, not only their own tokens, but through obviously the fact that they're funding the civil media company and the foundation, which owns the other 30% or so tokens according to the ratios that were in the original statement announcing the token sale. So yeah, according to the current descriptions of the civil protocol mechanisms, this means that Consensus would not only have unilateral ability to vote in new changes, but there is absolutely no chance that the other token holders involved would even be able to challenge their decisions because decisions or new features can only be challenged with a 2/3 majority. So if they have 2/3, then they can not only implement new features, but no one can challenge them or make changes to the protocol or whatever. Now, the CEO says this is no big deal because we can solve this very, very embarrassing problem by having Consensus agree in some way, probably some legal agreement to, quote, either not use the tokens for voting or to work directly with the foundation to ensure that the tokens are voted in a manner that does not represent the outsized ownership by Consensus as we bootstrap the system. That's a big problem. So it just got when I started tweeting about this, I was just planning to make a short thread criticizing what I saw as some problems. And guess what? My my intuitions came true, and it also turned into an even bigger shit show than I anticipated. And Jeff Jarvis actually tweeted, he's been tweeting in support of Civil, but also complaining about some problems. And one of them was the actual process of buying these tokens in the first place, which, as I pointed out previously, was completely KYC'd and it took quite a while to do. Most people who attempted the quiz failed it. And I'm honestly surprised anyone passed it because in order to pass, you had to demonstrate a basic understanding of how the system worked. But this thing is so obscure to me based on the public documentation that I'm not even sure what the hell they're doing. So I'm surprised anyone passed the test. But basically, Jeff Jarvis said that the actual process of buying the tokens was way too difficult. I'm going to quote him directly. He says, "What an incredible, confusing pain. And none of that is Civil's fault. None. The structure of buying tokens is ungodly awful. No wonder not enough old, dumb mortals like me have bought. But I'm glad I did." Well, I pointed out that Token Foundry, which was the entity that handled the whole quiz and KYC process for Civil in distributing these tokens, is run by Consensus. So basically, I don't know if I mentioned it in the last show, but the other part of the infrastructure controlled by Consensus will be the Ethereum and IPFS nodes that Civil is going to run. That is going to be run by Infura, which is owned by Consensus. So everything here is owned by Consensus. Civil apparently is not interested in controlling any of their own infrastructure independent of Consensus. So I fail to see how they're going to have any kind of separation of concerns from their literally only investor. But yeah, that's basically the update. There's still a bunch of people claiming that they think this is going to work, but I don't see how this is anything other than basically Consensus trying to form its own media company through a very obscure and stupid and embarrassing process of like a token launch where they buy their own tokens and no one else seems to really be interested. I mean, very few people.
So we're going to build a decentralized media company that we own 2/3 of the token for. You vote on changes with on a decentralized content distribution platform that we run all the servers for. Yay, blockchain.
I cannot follow. Can you repeat?
Repeat which part?
Which part of the bullshit did you not
never
understand?
mind.
So, in summary, Consensus basically owns every aspect of this project. There is no independence except for obviously the newsrooms or the publications that have signed up to be partners with Civil are obviously still publishing through their own platforms, thank God. But yeah, basically everything at every layer is owned by Consensus. The funding mostly comes from Consensus. The cloud hosting, whatever they call that, is going to be run. The infrastructure is all by Consensus. The token foundry thing where you even have to KYC yourself and get the tokens is run by Consensus. Everything is run by Consensus. So I am failing to see where the decentralization is in this system.
Just put on your imagination hat.
Yeah. So if anyone has more comments on that before we go on to the next story, which is kind of related.
Identity on the blockchain, medical records on the blockchain.
Well,
let's just put life on the blockchain.
Well, funnily enough, the day that the transparency I think it was the day after, the day on the same time that the transparency report came out from Civil saying, oh, this is really fucked up. We didn't know that this was going so badly. I think Consensus had a tweet poll saying, hey, what do you think about putting medical records on the blockchain, guys? And I was like, oh, please. No, you're moving from...
Everyone gets there. Everyone gets there eventually.
You're moving from screwing up journalism to screwing up medicine. Like, not interested.
Privacy.
But you're not putting the actual records on the blockchain. You're only putting hashes, which...
Well, no. So
I was accosted by...
At least you're not exposing the...
I've actually talked to these people.
Okay. Yeah.
They want to put the actual data on the blockchain.
Yeah, Tara, some people think the blockchain is a database, and they think that you could just stick a whole bunch of raw data in there and it's going to magically increase transparency like a panacea. It's all going to be all right.
So I think I mentioned it in the last show, but there's one woman, she's, I think, head editor or something of something called Popula, and someone was trying to tell her, like, Ethereum you can't just use it as like a place to like park your data. That's not what it's meant for. You can't just, it's not a database that you can just archive stuff in. And she said, oh, I really disagree with you. I'm not paying for storage. I'm paying for decentralized archiving. And I'm like, what? How can you have archiving without storage? Like, I don't even know what that means. So these people are completely disconnected from the fact that, and like, I was also initially confused because in their Medium post, they say that they're putting the metadata into the Ethereum blockchain. I was like, okay, well, that's not completely horrible. I don't see what that gives you if what you're writing doesn't actually require censorship resistance. Like Forbes does not need censorship resistance. No one wants to censor Forbes. But then I read a statement from one of the partners saying that they wanted to do what the Me Too activists in, I think it was China, had done, where they posted a letter of sexual misconduct allegations into the Ethereum blockchain. That was full text. I don't know. I think it was maybe encoded with U2F8 or something. Not sure. but they basically it's kind of contradictory. Like in one place they say only metadata, another place they say full text. So I honestly don't know which one it really is. I don't know, but the fact that they're treating this like, oh, we're just archiving it. It's like, yeah, that requires storage. Do you understand what the storage capacity of the network is? Clearly not. And they've made statements like, oh, the putting metadata in the blockchain will like prove the reputation of the journalists. And it's like, okay, I don't think it does that either. Or the credibility. It's like you can put any shit you want in the Ethereum blockchain. It doesn't make it true. It's not magic.
So actually what it proves is that at that point in time, this thing existed, right? So
yes, that's the only thing. Like beyond that, like they're claiming that just putting metadata into the blockchain, like they're making a bunch of additional claims about what that does, and I think they're misinterpreting what a blockchain actually does and what timestamping stuff in a blockchain does. I think they're overhyping it, which is, of course, that's what a lot of these projects do. So, not surprised.
Put it on the blockchain. Alrighty though. We're ready to give us an update on one of our favorite cypherpunks?
Yeah, I mean, I thought a few days ago it was going to be a happier update, but apparently not. I mean, it's related to the Civil thing because one of the things that really pissed me off is that one of Civil's media partners said that WikiLeaks should not be considered a major media organization, which seems completely stupid to me because they actually publish some of their stuff on the Bitcoin blockchain or hashes of it and torrent links and stuff. And they also put their latest release of the Amazon servers, the map of the Amazon servers, they put that on IPFS. So they've done more to decentralize journalism so far than Civil has. So, you know, they've done more work in that area. And so that's pretty insulting for them to say that when they've barely even gotten out of the gate. But basically a few days ago, it was announced. I'm not sure who directly announced it. It must have been through the Ecuadorian embassy or the Ecuadorian government. But they basically said that they were going to partially restore Julian Assange's access or communication privileges to the outside world. And I believe that the reason was because they got a visit from some people from the UN. That's what I heard, is that they think that maybe the UN talked to them about it, and because, you know, we're all worried about this journalist getting murdered in Saudi Arabia, but of course, you know, the US still hasn't been held accountable for what they did in the collateral murder video, but who cares about that? And so basically it was announced that he was going to have his communications restored, and so far that has not happened. And actually he was supposed to have a meeting with legal counsel, I think it was 2 days ago. And as far as we know, that legal counsel was actually blocked. They were not allowed to go into the embassy. So not sure exactly what they plan to do, but someone translated a copy of the new agreement that was given to Assange. And it basically, I'm going to open it right now because I don't have it open. But it basically, I mean, obviously it's much looser than the conditions that he had before, which was that for the past several months, he wasn't allowed to have any visitors outside of his legal counsel, which is extremely restrictive. They've now opened it up to, you know, any visitor besides his legal counsel. But if you want to visit him at the embassy, you have to schedule it at least 3 business days in advance. You have to give your first and last name. You have to provide a copy of an identity document like a passport or an identification card, depending on what kind of ID you have for your country. You have to state what the reason for the visit is, and if it's done in a personal capacity or on behalf of another person. You have to state what your profession is. You have to give the employer and address of your workplace. You have to provide email and social media addresses. You have to also, this is probably the most invasive part, if you plan to take any devices whatsoever into the embassy, you have to provide the serial, the brand, model, serial number, IMEI number, and telephone number of any devices like cameras, computers, phone, anything. You have to provide that when you enter the embassy. And they state, I think somewhere in this agreement, I'm not sure where it is, probably at the end, but they've already stated that they will share that with intelligence services. Who knows who that is? Could be just Ecuadorian intelligence services, could be British intelligence services, but basically you have to like completely dox yourself in order to visit him. And I think they do mention that you can just, if you just show up and you haven't applied before, you still have to fill out this form anyway, before you actually enter. Like he can't just approve you to come in and then you just walk in. And you also, if you want to be a frequent visitor, you have to renew that form, I think every 2 to 3 months. Yeah, every 3 months you have to renew the form. So fill it out all over again. And one of the things, I'm not sure if it's in this document, but they mentioned that one of the conditions they're giving him is that he has to take responsibility for the care of his pet cat. And this was probably the weirdest thing in the statement or the new protocol agreement, because the BBC kind of blew it up. They have this article that is titled Julian Assange Given Feline Ultimatum by Ecuador. And basically the entire article from the BBC is focusing on the fact that he was asked to take responsibility for caring for his cat. And they kind of implied, which was not implied in the original statement, they kind of implied that this was about him not taking care of his cat, as in he had been neglecting the cat, which was not reflected in the original statement. Another condition, they also requested that he has to, starting in December, he has to pay for all of his meals and laundry and all of that. So basically they won't be supporting him in that way. He'll just basically have a room in there. I don't know if he has to like pay for building fees or rent fees or whatever. But it was really embarrassing, this BBC article, because in the original version, which I think it was posted yesterday, they actually cited a tweet from a fake Julian Assange account where they cited it as saying that, let me try and find it. Where is it? I have to find it really quick. But they cited a fake Julian Assange account, and they claimed that he said, "Oh, what's a good way to save money? Don't shower." And it was supposed to be like poking fun at the fact that, you know, he's stuck in this building and probably dealing with a lot of, you know, psychological and mental health issues, and maybe he has trouble taking care of himself, which I don't find funny at all. I don't think anyone should find that funny. But the hilarious thing is that they cited a fake account. They quoted that as being from him. And in the updated article, because a bunch of people complained about it, obviously they didn't know who to complain to, because the coward who wrote this article does not even put their name on it. They have a correction all the way at the end of the article saying that they've updated it and that they misattributed the quote to him. So, yeah, I thought it was going to be good news. I think this was announced on the 15th, the 14th or the 15th. And I thought it was going to be good news because I thought, you know, it was about restoring his communication. But, yeah, it's basically just been another opportunity for the media to make fun of him and talk about like this allegation that he's been neglecting his cat, which unfortunately a lot of people in the information security space or internet freedom activism space actually think is funny and like to promote, which is really disgusting. And that's really it.
Okay, so to say not to make light of this before I go on to make light of this, what everybody who visits him should do is get a Windows laptop with TeamViewer installed and let them catalog everything, and then spend the next month doing nothing but playing lots of hardcore gay porn on their laptop. You know, because they'll be watching everything.
Well, I
But yeah.
mean, if anyone even felt comfortable just completely doxing themselves and their employer to the Ecuadorian embassy and all the other intelligence agencies that they're sharing the data with, I think the smartest thing would just be to not bring any devices. That seems like the smartest thing to me. Like, why would you even bring your, like, you have no idea. This embassy is so heavily surveilled, and the Ecuadorian staff themselves have jammers, which they have been using to prevent him from using his own devices to communicate with the outside world. So the idea that you would even want to bring any of your personal devices into this building is absurd. Like, you're just basically, that's essentially asking for it at that point. You wouldn't want to bring your devices in. Just leave them at home.
Yeah, I mean, it's fucked up, but I don't know. I get a kick off of the idea of a bunch of NSA agents having to watch gay porn because, you know, they're surveilling me.
Well, the thing is, they won't even be fazed by that because a lot of people in the NSA and the FBI and a lot of these intelligence agencies have their own internal problem where they look at child porn a lot, like a large percentage of them. That is not even a secret. There was a report, I think, a year or two ago that said that when, I'm not sure if it was the FBI or the NSA, but they had their computers examined and a high percentage of them had child porn on them. Not like, oh, we're investigating child porn, as in we were watching it. So good luck with that.
All right, joke flopped. So yeah, it's at this point it is just beyond fucked up, the situation that he's in, and like I still can't believe that Ecuador just is completely caving on every aspect of offering him asylum when it's literally under their own law and constitution pretty much illegal what they're doing. Like, he is an actual citizen of Ecuador and they're pretty much affording him none of the constitutional rights that he has as a citizen.
Yeah, but see, this is what happens when you make the United States the police of the world, is that when it's in their interest to, give some side eye and look away from crimes being committed, especially when they're probably involved in the crimes being committed, they have no interest in holding other countries like this to account. The UK has no interest in holding Ecuador to account. So, of course, they're going to do this. And, of course, one of the big reasons that Ecuador is caving now is, one, because they had a change in president since Assange went into the embassy. The previous president was a lot more favorable for his situation. And the current one is not, because the U.S. has been have not only rewarding them, carrot and stick philosophy. They've not only been rewarding Ecuador with, I think, some trade deals, but they've also been engaging in some covert operations along their border to instill fear that, where Ecuador is going to be invaded. And then they come in and say, well, we'll help you with border patrol and all of that. So they're like, look, we'll attack your border and then we'll simultaneously offer you support so that doesn't happen again. It's like none of this really surprises me. Like, this is what happens when you have a major world power and you fight a major world power. So my only hope is that someone in Ecuador or in the UK with enough authority will say enough is enough and they'll let him go.
Can only hope. All right, though. Just hit the hour mark or about. So, Chris.
Yes. So this is an unlikely story. A story about identity on a blockchain. And it's Microsoft, decentralized identity, own and control your identity, and the verdict is, the TLDR before we get started is, it's not quite as shit as you think. I think that's a good summation of it. So I think really start with the vision statement, because a lot of the people maybe watching this show have been around in crypto, as in cryptocurrency for a number of years. Maybe you followed some of our work on here before. And 3 or 4 years ago, I was part, I think, of a group of people who really wanted to see if we could help decentralized identity. Not this kind of grotesque kind of like, let's put everyone's identity or medical records literally on a blockchain, of course, but looking at ways in which we could use decentralized technology, of which Bitcoin is just one part, to help people take back control of their personal digital information so that it doesn't get exploited by large companies or even governments for surveillance techniques. So one of the things I like about this document here that Microsoft have released, and the link will be in the description below, is that they actually are really quite on the money. They're really quite accurate in when they say the mission statement here is Microsoft's mission is to empower every person on the planet to achieve more. So think about that word, achieve more, and how much your identity really is shaped by your actions. And every time you act on the internet, you are leaving a digital exhaust of data behind you that can be gathered and collated, and with the use of something called graph theory, can start to build a picture. But the problem is that these companies care more about you often than you do, right? Which means that they get to remember all the actions you took when you've long since forgotten. Because at the moment, the internet browser, the most common application in the world, it doesn't really give you many tools for knowledge management. All of those tabs that you have open that are essentially to-do lists and are essentially things to come back to later because you don't have time right now. So what I like about this is they talk about the leading with open standards. And so they want this to be decentralized. But what I'm also reading in this pitch, and also the technical document that comes with it, which hopefully we'll provide a link to below as well from the W3C, is it's really about federation for me. I haven't quite, I'll show you some of the diagrams of how they think that this user is going to be stored. And what I still need an answer to, and I don't have it right here, is where exactly the raw data is stored. At the moment, I think the story is that the user stores their data encrypted, and then they are able to access it through a series of servers. I saw Azure was mentioned in this document, for example, but they want to use a decentralized PKI, public key infrastructure. DID stands for decentralized identity. So they talk about the decentralized identities are rooted in decentralized systems that provide a mechanism and features required for the decentralized public key infrastructure. And what I quite like about it is that if you look up blockchain in this document, I really like this statement they make where actually they say that the blockchain is not actually the right system to be using for decentralized identities, as in it's not about just putting raw data in there. So I really like that. Now I'm just going to skip to page 20 and really kind of look at what the use cases are for this. So they're saying that what this can be used for, and these are just 3 examples here, I'll just read the first 2, is things like, people that want to sell like eBay style model, the gig economy, for example, think people per hour or Fiverr. And then you've got things like the patients can allow doctors to interact with the medical data, providing access, rather than we're just going to store a bunch of medical data in a blockchain and just kind of put it up there because hashtag transparency and because hashtag blockchain. So I really like the way they've approached it. I think it's absolutely appropriate. And I think, 3 or 4 years ago, when you basically had power users that were entering the space, I think those power, when users talk about technology, they usually think in terms of end features. They think in terms of a finished product. They don't think about how you're going to get there. They don't think about all the hardware that's involved in the server environment. They don't think about the firmware that runs on top, which is crucial to the security infrastructure that's laid on top. Like, for example, if you need a hardware security module, how is that going to work? How are you going to prevent physical interaction from an evil maid? How are you going to protect the supply chain? All of these kinds of things, when people imagine the final product of how, if I'm in an accident emergency, if I'm traveling abroad and I'm hit by a car, how are the paramedics going to get access to my medical history so that they know what drugs to administer and what drugs are not safe, particularly if I'm not conscious, particularly if I don't have any friends or family around who can help the paramedics, right? Could be the difference between life and death. And so those kinds of issues is where you might need, for example, something highly private and sensitive, like your medical records, in a manner that is available and permissioned, so that only the right people can get hold of it. So I quite like it. I think that a few years ago we were just dealing with power end users, enthusiastic end users, who were just starting to imagine the possibilities, and now we're actually getting to the nitty gritty, where actual engineers and actually companies with a lot of skin in the game, a lot of money, want to throw back this. And I think also I would just end with the thought that, you know, every kind of 10 years or so, you have one of these companies that maybe fell back, you know, after Microsoft's big run in the 90s and the early 2000s. And you usually get a comeback story. Like you had Apple in the 2000s, for example, looked like a massive failure, almost like they were going to go out of business in the 90s. And in the 2000s, they just came back. And I've got a feeling that the next sort of 10 years or so, that's going to be Microsoft's story. You know, they really are changing up their game. They're starting to open up their software stack. They're really embracing open source. And I don't think they're just doing that for marketing purposes. I think they really mean it. So yeah, sorry, I've been a bit of a shill for Microsoft. I didn't mean to come across that way. Still would like to know the role of Azure. Need to probably read the document in a bit more detail, but really recommend that people check it out and let us know what you think in the comments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is the fucking twilight zone. Google is building surveillance tools for China, and Microsoft is building like self-sovereign identity tools. But like, you know, it still blows my mind. But like, you know, the whole architecture of this is just brilliant, in my opinion. Like, from what I've gathered through like the tech spec and like a lot of stuff, because I've been following this, you know, probably for the last couple months, is like you would effectively create your identity and then anchor it into the blockchain, and that would come with like your identity key and then some resource identifiers for servers. And like your question as far as like where is the data actually stored, my understanding is like you could pretty much do it anywhere, from like storing it in something like the Azure cloud to like running your own server and keeping it there. And that initial anchoring would kind of have your identity key and then pointers to where you can actually like act or attempt to access information, and it would all be stored encrypted wherever you want to. And so like this would allow you to effectively have like attestations from like other identities. Like I think one of the examples they gave was like a university notarizing that you've graduated or were in good standing with them, or some other entity like going like, yes, this is what this digital identity actually looks like, you know, in terms of like a picture, so that you could verify like, hey, like the guy, this picture you're looking at is actually this decentralized identity. And like the way I kind of am like reading between the lines in terms of data access is, I would imagine like you could locally like access your data and then re-encrypt it to another identifier. So like in the example of like medical record access, you could duplicate that encrypted to whoever you're giving access to the medical records. And then they, using their decentralized identifier, would be the only person capable of actually accessing that. And like the whole architecture, like you said, it's like a big federated model where you can effectively store your data anywhere from a centralized place, or like actually host it yourself completely encrypted. And the way that the identity roots itself in the blockchain, you could actually build indexes so that you can go back with the actual Merkle proof it's in a blockchain and verify like this was created here, this is the identity, this is where you can attempt to access attestations from other people for it, or any information that it might store you've been given access to. And it's, you know, like it really is the fucking twilight zone to me. I mean, like in the early 2000s, like Google was that company that was opening things up, giving people tools for themselves. And Microsoft was the big bad guy that's just like doing everything they can to lock you down and force you into their systems. And things have just completely fucking flipped on their head. Like, I really don't know how to process it as somebody who has had a visceral hatred of Microsoft for like the past 10 years. Like,
Windows is
Yeah.
still a piece of shit.
It is, but I really love this acknowledgement on page 5 that they make, where they talk about the use of email. Actually, further up here, they talk about how email has become like a centralized de facto kind of identity layer. And they actually acknowledge here, you know, this is the inventors of Outlook, and Microsoft also bought Hotmail, remember, which is one of the most popular web-based email clients from the early 2000s. And they talk about how, you know, this kind of centralization of, you know, granting access to numerous apps and devices, which warrants a high degree of vigilance of tracking of who has access to what information. It's very revealing. I mean, it's interesting to hear the same company that built a lot of that infrastructure, they're now deposing. And I like this story of decomposition. I like this idea of creative destruction in this particular case, of where we start to decompose and digest some of those earlier systems that we were building. And now we start to go away from that. And they also talk about the decentralized identity starting off its life with very little validity, because of course it needs other trust anchors in the network, not the word that they use, but you need to kind of develop the identity over time. For example, if you need a different identity on one app or one website, like your health app, for example, you don't want to bind your health data to, let's say, your email account that you use for work. And so you're going to need to have multiple identities, a kind of a prismatic identity system. And then you'll be able to kind of pick and choose which ephemeral identity you want to use for which particular purpose in your life. But then that will have to accrue a certain reputation on the network before it has certain privileges.
So I wrote, when I first started working on blockchain, then I went to a company and I had to came up with a decentralized identity scheme, which they actually deleted their whole Google Drive and they lost everything. So I cannot dig it up anymore. But I figured out. But one of the things how I explained it back then was, when you go into a bar, then what you have to, and you want to buy some alcohol, then what you have to show is not that how old you are, or not your whole ID. They don't need any of those information. The only thing they need is that you are over 18 and nothing else. And if we could apply this logic to many things in the world, that would be pretty good, because a lot of companies wouldn't have access to information that I'm presenting to everyone. A lot of companies wouldn't have access to information that they don't actually need.
Yeah, I agree. And I think IBM was working on something like that. They had a zero knowledge proof kind of identity management system with credentialing. So that, as you say, for example, if you go into a nightclub owner doesn't end up with your address and your date of birth and everything. It only knows whether or not he's allowed to let you into the club.
When I was living in Taiwan, or in Tokyo, I didn't go, but in Taiwan, in the nightclubs, they scan your ID every time you go in. What craziness is that?
I mean, it's really like the whole thing is just like it's necessary. I mean, like you cannot remove the need for identity in a society, because the entire like concept of a society and individuals interacting is all based around trust. But there are just so many problems in terms of like all of that information leaking and how it can be abused and used against you, like this is something absolutely needed in terms of like retooling that societal infrastructure going forward. And I mean, like it's not just about like, you know, access to your medical records or your online services or things like that that people in the developed world are looking at. I mean, systems like this allow you to kind of bring this kind of infrastructure to places like in the developing world where there isn't really as much of that, you know, infrastructure or those anchors of trust, and give people the opportunity to actually try to bootstrap their own self-reinforcing webs. And I mean, like, that opens up the issue of like Sybil attacks or like trying to manufacture these webs. But ultimately, like if that was done malevolently or without like an honest basis to it, then that would just wind up isolating the whole web from everything else. So even then, like, it's not really as bad of a problem as it could be. It would kind of self-correct, but it would allow people without all of the infrastructure that we have in the West to really start trying to put together some kind of basis of provable identity to where they can deal with the issues that exist because of that lack of infrastructure. Alrighty though.
Right, guys, I've got to head off, but it's really good. I'll be in the Mumble later on. If you guys are around, Bitcoin Mumble chat, check it out.
Mm-hmm. Good to have you,
thanks,
Chris.
Thanks for having me back on, guys.
See you.
Talk to you soon. Take care, bye.
Mm-hmm. Toodaloo. All right, and I think that fixed the screen sharing issue. So hooray! Alrighty. Any more thoughts on the issue of decentralized identity, or shall we move along? All right, move along. So, as I hate to do, we're gonna have to talk about Coinbase twice, and I'm gonna get really agitated and shit on them twice, as I like to do. So,
I'm going to say good things about Coinbase.
Blasphemer.
It's the only one.
But Coinbase a little while back opened up an office in the UK with the intent of pretty much expanding all across Europe and through the EU. And with the Brexit looming, that really didn't work out long term like they thought it might have. So Coinbase is actually going to be opening a branch in Dublin, Ireland right now to try and maintain that inroad into the EU. And is pretty much going to they're pretty much operating under the assumption that a hard Brexit is going to happen, and this is going to damage their ability to really keep expanding in the European market, being based out of the UK. And so they're kind of setting up a weird hybridized like co-location setup, I guess you could say, where they're going to be incorporating in Ireland and establishing offices there, but still leaving a lot of aspects in the London office, you know, such as marketing or obviously institutional sales, trying to deal with a lot of the financial companies in London and all of the global financial infrastructure that's set up there. But one of the things that they specifically have to do in the EU, or I'm sorry, not the EU, in the UK, is keep customer funds isolated and kind of separate them so that they can't be exposed to liabilities, whether they're taxes or damages or so on and so forth, due to their own fuck ups. And so I think this is really going to kind of strain their relationship in Europe in terms of they're going to have to maintain like different financial backends in terms of the fiat world in dealing with the United Kingdom versus Ireland and the rest of the EU. And I think this is going to kind of start overcomplicating like their back end, and also exposing potentially themselves to a little more risk in terms of managing fiat currencies. Because, you know, we'll get into it in a little bit, but banking relationships in the crypto world aren't really the most solid or dependable things. And moving to a whole new continent, like they're not in the same sweet spot they are in the US, because you have to move correspondent banks in the middle there or deal completely with foreign financial institutions. And they're not just directly plugged into this Silicon Valley bank that Andreessen Horowitz owns, which gives a little more of a guarantee that that fiat relationship is going to be there. And especially, dealing with different financial regulations in Europe and the UK, like this, I'm not really sure like how to look at the chance of success for this, and the kind of extra overhead in terms of complying with regulations that this is going to cause. But I don't know. We'll just kind of have to see how this plays out. All right, no par, get your complimenting in so that I can call you a blasphemer.
So I was looking at Bitcoin wallets, and I came up with a system to score them based on, I'm actually going to share my screen. Can you see it?
Yep.
Okay, so I came up with a system to score the Bitcoin wallets, and based on privacy, trust, security, ease of use, never mind, and some interesting thing happened. That if you look at, let's say, Bitcoin Core's privacy or the privacy of Electrum, then you will see that Coinbase got something there too. Isn't it interesting? Why is that? You have, what do you think?
I think you're a blasphemer, and I hope that this expansion in the EU fucks up Coinbase. Fuck that company. And fuck your check mark too.
Okay, so my point was that that from privacy point of view, I put wallets how well they are resist from blockchain to blockchain analysis, and how well they are resisting through network observers. And Coinbase resists against blockchain analysis pretty well, because they don't use the blockchain only for depositing and withdrawing, right? In between Coinbase transactions don't even hit the blockchain. And if you think about that, who can read the blockchain? The smart people. So I unshare my screen. The smart people, those are the people who are working on blockchain analysis. But this is just software. This is going to get open source, right? There is already a walletexplorer.com that's doing some very, very basic blockchain analysis. So, for example, you're not going to, your grandma is not going to figure out that you bought some some marijuana yesterday, right? Through Coinbase, but your grandma might figures it out through an open source website that's doing a blockchain analysis if you are using a real Bitcoin wallet, or similar things like what your ex-boyfriend is spying on you. They have no chance to do anything through Coinbase, through banks. So this is one of the cases why the privacy of Bitcoin must be improved, because it just doesn't work as well in some ways than as the legacy system. So that's my take on it, and that's the only compliment Coinbase gets from me. It got a big red cross too, just because of they owned other people's money. So yeah, there is that. I definitely don't advise Coinbase for privacy, but you have to think what's your threat model is, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, there's your compliment. So let's get to the next one and shit on them again. So a while back, we covered a ZeroX project on Ethereum and the fact that Coinbase bought them out and a DEX based on it. And a little while ago, they started trading this token on GDAX. And yes, I'm going to keep calling it GDAX. Coinbase Pro sounds stupid. It's GDAX. And it has just launched on Coinbase proper. So the limitations, as they've said when they went through their whole framework and their strategy in terms of listing more shitcoins, is that jurisdictionally they might not be available everywhere. So ZeroX is not available in the United Kingdom or the state of New York. Well, let's poke and prod with VPNs and see how solid of a check that is, and then maybe we can get the New York Attorney General on Coinbase's ass, for once, instead of ignoring everything fucked up they do. But this project is pretty much an ICO shitcoin that is a protocol to develop a decentralized exchange on Ethereum, and that clearly explains why it's not available in Britain or New York. It's arguably a security, but Coinbase is finally rolling the dice and saying, fuck it. Like, who cares what regulatory gray areas or risks exist? Because, I mean, hell, the New York Attorney General just issued a report on all the exchanges in this space. And despite constantly shitting on Binance and Kraken for market manipulation, they didn't mention a word about our surprise launch of Bcash or the manipulation on the Coinbase side where all the Bcash buys went through but nobody could sell. I guess we can just do whatever the fuck we want.
They investigated it and they came to the conclusion that there were no manipulation. Right?
They investigated themselves and said that no insider leaks happened, and it's completely unexplained why numerous people I know that go in pump and dump groups on Discord and Telegram knew like 2 days ahead of time that the listing was happened. I mean, it was definitely nobody in Coinbase. They just found out somehow, magic. But this is shifting the direction for Coinbase. And I think they're just going to get more and more reckless in terms of regulatory risk to themselves and what they choose to list. And the ZeroX protocol, I'll say again, is pretty much their head share, because all of these shit tokens and ICOs on Ethereum that they can't directly list on Coinbase because of the fact that they're obviously securities or scams. Well, they purchased the, I believe it's called Paradex, DEX built on top of this ZeroX protocol. And they can just move things there. If it's too risky in terms of regulation to actually list something directly on Coinbase because of concerns of it being a security or fraud, they can just move it and trade it on Paradex and claim this is a decentralized exchange. Like that, this isn't our company. Like, we're not liable for what happens here. Like, we can't stop anybody from doing anything. And I'm honestly kind of shocked that it took them this long to really just completely bro down and just go totally shitcoin crazy. And like, again, like this entire situation with them in Europe and trying to kind of manage access, in and out of the UK. I really hope, fuck you, Coinbase, this bites you in the ass, because they are one of the biggest little guy on-ramps in terms of people who just show up in the space with no idea what's going on. And one of the things I think, at least, that has kind of prevented a large number of these people from really completely fucking themselves up in this market is that there is a big learning curve, relatively speaking, from going to Coinbase and purchasing Bitcoin or one of the few coins that they list there and moving to other exchanges, diving into the real shit of shit coins in terms of allocating their money. And I think to some degree, this has kind of protected a large amount of people, because it's really like at least before this year, it was Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Litecoin is really all you could directly expose yourself through through Coinbase. And that acted as kind of a safeguard against people's own stupidity. But as they move into just directly listing all of these scams and these shit coins, those safeguards just fall away. Like now people can just come into the Coinbase garden with Coinbase holding their hands and pretty much sink their money into more and more reckless and unsound investments without that extra barrier to actually have to educate themselves or learn to some degree before they can find a route to expose themselves to these things. And like it's like seriously, like fuck you, Coinbase. Like they're all they're doing is just trying to cycle people through a machine and wring their pockets of all the money that they can. And they really don't give a shit about how safe or sound the thing that people are investing in is. They just want to take your money. And like fuck them. Come on, nobody else is gonna get a fuck you Coinbase out of their system.
I don't really think that. I mean, it's surprising, yes, that Coinbase is shitcoining, but I don't want to hold a moral high ground for, you know, if they want to shitcoin, then shitcoin. I mean, they are not the fathers of all the idiots who are buying into Elephant Coin and Coinbase Coin, and I don't know. It's not like they are promoting them, you know.
But that's the thing, they are. They're literally putting it on their exchange and going, buy this. We just listed this. Like Brian Armstrong in a year went from all of these shit coins, or in his words, altcoins, are distractions and we should concentrate on Bitcoin, to Ethereum is the future and is going to topple Bitcoin. And look at all of these tokens. We're going to tokenize that. Like they're directly pushing for these things. Like that's part of the whole process of listing these things. Like, hey guys, buy this now. We'll sell you this now.
Also, I believe Linda, I don't remember her last name, but there's a woman named Linda who is also an advisor to ZeroX. So that's a conflict of interest. But of course, they have many conflicts of interest.
Litecoin, Charlie Lee.
I mean, come on, Litecoin was like, Charlie Lee was their main engineer and he created Litecoin, right? So it's just such an obvious thing that what you know, the system that you know the most, that you are going to integrate that system, even if it's in your free time. Come on.
Dude, Charlie is a nice guy, but I mean, come on. The second Litecoin got listed, he left. After it got exposed to all the Coinbase customers and they all FOMO'd in and started oh, I got it listed. Bye guys. Like it's like the whole company is just a shit show of like ethical contortions to just wring money out of people's pockets with outright scams or just horrible ideas. But yeah, I don't know. Fuck Coinbase. So let's talk about another thing that has an opportunity to really eat Coinbase's lunch. So there is a supplier of ATMs in the United States named Genmega. They have shit tons of ATMs, like more than 100,000 in the United States. They are going to be partnering with LibertyX, which is a voucher system to purchase Bitcoins, kind of like Beautyon's company Azteco, where you show up to a supporting retailer, you pay them in cash, and they print you out a receipt voucher to go redeem the Bitcoin through their website or platform. And they're going to be updating the software for all of their ATMs so that any owner of one of their ATMs can flip a switch and their ATM is now a place to buy Bitcoin. And not just buy Bitcoin, but buy it with your debit card. So you don't even have to use cash. Any merchant who owns one of these ATMs can activate this software upgrade. You stick your debit card in the machine, you press a few buttons, and you get a voucher code for Bitcoin. There's more than 100,000 of these ATMs. There's only right now, I think, something like 3,000 Bitcoin ATMs in the entire world. And this company is about to create the software upgrade that allows every single one of their legacy ATMs to start functioning as a Bitcoin ATM. Talk about an on-ramp.
The same thing is going on in Taiwan. Even in 2015, maybe they, family marts, there are in every corner of Taiwan, and the family marts have some kind of machine. I couldn't figure out how to use it because it's in Chinese, but people can use that machine and use it a lot, and that has been upgraded so you can buy Bitcoin on it. And yeah, that was quite an interesting thing. You can buy Bitcoin in Taiwan in every corner, but of course they have such a fees that you wouldn't do that. So that's really interesting. Actually, in 2013 or 14, we were young kids and we wanted to build a Bitcoin ATM. That's the big business. And then someone explained to us that Bitcoin ATM is a terrible business. You should not do that because there are so many ATM companies already, and they just think one and they're gonna get the whole market, and your ATM is just not gonna do anything. And I was looking at it's not really happening, right? While it looks like, is it happening, or are these just news? Or it's happening?
I mean, it hasn't happened yet, but I mean, like, really think about this. I mean, over like the past like couple months, even most of the summer, everybody has been obsessing about these institutional on ramps, like banks getting involved, backed now Fidelity. And it's very much necessary infrastructure in terms of really bringing in capital that's going to get Bitcoin to a point where it's large enough and it's stable enough to really start functioning as money. But the on ramps for your average person suck. I mean, like even Square Cash, like you have to put in your ID, you have to take a picture of your face to verify that. You have to go through extra verification even just to withdraw the Bitcoin from Square Cash. And that's a pretty seamless like on ramp for your normal person. Like they don't have to go register a whole exchange, submit anything more than an ID, like deal with bank wires and like, all of these kinds of like frictions and limitations on things. Like it's not easy at all for a normal person to just sink like some normal person amount of money into Bitcoin. And like this is just fucking profound. I mean, this is literally like any ATM owner just flip a switch, so to say, and your totally normal ATM people use to pull cash out of their bank is now somewhere they can buy Bitcoin. There's no crazy friction. There's no submitting all of these. You just stick your card in, you hit a few buttons, and you have Bitcoin. And I mean, like this kind of infrastructure shift on the opposite end from the institutions, like this is the kind of shit we really need. Because on one hand, yeah, we do need things like Fidelity, like backed to really bring that large amount of money in. But we also need places where your normal person can get Bitcoin. I mean, like this is like it's not some binary thing. Bitcoin is just going to be some investment thing for Wall Street or a currency for the people. It needs to be both. Like it can't be that currency for people without all of that large capital coming in to the point where we have the market cap, we have the price stability for a normal person to use it and not sit there and wonder like, oh wait, should I go buy groceries today? Did Bitcoin drop 50% in value? Like the two things have to come together and meet in the middle, or neither one of them is going to make sense. And I mean, it really bothers me when I see like a huge story like this pop up in the news cycle, and I see almost nobody talking about it or like thinking about the implications it has in the long term. Everybody's just screaming about Fidelity or like, when is Wall Street getting in here? Like there's a whole spectrum of things that have to be dealt with, and people are getting way too over obsessed with just one side of that. Cricket. All right, so should we call this story a wrap after that Shinobi rant?
Call.
All right. So everybody, this one's going to be fun. So on the 15th, Bitfinex made a comment regarding their fiat deposits being shut down and pointed out that all cryptocurrency withdrawals have been functioning just as normal, that all fiat withdrawals had been functioning as normal, and that it was simply deposits that were paused. So all the fun with Tether dumping down to 80 something cents, if you sold it, you're an idiot. And people just made a bunch of free money off of your stupidity. All the crazy price premiums on Bitfinex because people freaked out and had to get Bitcoin because I can't withdraw fiat. Yes, you could have. It was functioning the whole time. They have fixed this issue, and you can now resume fiat deposits. And I think the solution here is really telling. So pretty much what they're doing is breaking things up and distributing the entire banking side of things. You will get a unique account and have to go through a process of telling them how much you're actually going to deposit in terms of fiat. They will go through this and set things up and then give you a bank to wire things. And there's now a warning on the site that this banking information is sensitive information. It should not be shared with anybody except your financial institution when you are conducting a wire. And that spreading this information around publicly is not only damaging to you in Bitfinex, but could damage the entire cryptocurrency ecosystem. And so looking at this warning, how they're structuring fiat deposits going forward, to me, this really confirms a lot of what I've been suspecting in terms of the issues they've been dealing with over the last few years with their banks. Somebody is fucking with them. Like there is absolutely no reason for them to be structuring fiat deposits like this, except somebody is fucking with them. Somebody is intentionally going out of their way, whether it's to make suspicious deposits, whether it's some agency leaning on banks after they've figured out where Finex is banking. And remember, when they pulled their money out of Noble Bank and Noble Bank entered bankruptcy and is now trying to sell the bank, the detail everybody was ignoring was that their custodian bank that actually held the money in New York City severed their relationships with Noble Bank. So they actually had no place to park a lot of money at that point. Again, indicative of somebody fucking with things. So with all of the nonsense and all of the screaming about they're printing Tether out of thin air, It's the next Mount Gox. I think you need to step back and actually look at how all these pieces line up. I do not personally believe whatsoever that Tether is being printed out of thin air. I do not believe that Bitfinex is insolvent. I think what's going on here is whether it's governments, whether it's big banks themselves, somebody is going out of their way at every point possible to fuck up this company's ability to actually maintain fiat banking services because they don't like the fact that such a dominant exchange in this industry is pretty much not playing ball with a lot of the absurd and overreaching regulation that seems to be sweeping in all over the place. They don't like the fact that such a huge aspect of the pricing mechanism is not letting the government stick its thumb up their ass. Or if it's banking institutions, they don't like the fact that Tether exists because now they don't get a cut of the arbitrage. You don't have to move your money through their correspondent banking networks every time you want to move fiat from one exchange to another. You can just park it with Tether and transfer Tether tokens around seamlessly without these banks actually getting a cut out of each and every fiat transfer. And Bitfinex is still there. They're still in business. They're still dealing with this. And this solution is going to be very telling because the way that they've structured this, if banks start getting fucked with, they can narrow down who is letting that information out there. Because the way they've distributed things, the way you have to declare a fiat deposit and only afterwards be given a bank to wire it to, they can actually look at who is being given what banking information, how many people that's being distributed around, and figure out who's actually giving this information away to whichever entity is fucking with them. And this is, like, personally, I think just brilliant because this company is not putting up with the bullshit. It's not just caving and going, okay, regulators, we'll bend over. It's not just capitulating and shutting down their business to let all of these Wall Street and legacy players come in and dominate the marketplace and the pools of liquidity where Bitcoin is being priced. And this is something that more companies need to have the balls to do. This entire ecosystem was built out to actually get out from under the thumb of ridiculous over-the-line regulations, to get out from under the thumb of governments who decide who can and can't do what. And this is a company that's actually living up to that under huge pressure from either the legacy banking system or government agencies or both, pretty much doing everything they can to stomp this company out of business. So again, and I've been saying this pretty much every time these kinds of issues come up in the news cycle, actually look at all of the pieces and connect the dots. This whole ecosystem is founded on the ethos, don't trust, verify. Just because a large amount of people are screaming something on Twitter doesn't mean shit in terms of what is actually happening.
What is the ethos again?
Don't trust, verify.
Wait, I'm so. Did you just
Yes.
mute?
I could mute him before the e-ban.
Oh. I mean, the only thing I want to point out, I think it was a tweet from Whalepool where they pointed out that none of the other stable coins do full audits. They only rely on attestations of reserves. So none of the other stable coins that have come out recently even use a different process than what Tether uses. Obviously, this is not endorsing Tether because I don't like Bitfinex or Tether, but yeah.
So wait, all of the other stable coins just do the exact same thing Tether does in terms of proving they have funds.
Yeah, imagine that. Even when you're fully regulated, you often do the exact same stuff as a supposedly unregulated entity, but whatever.
Wow, it's almost like they're full of shit and just trying to fuck up this one company because they won't play ball with all the regulations. Huh. Did you look at that? Alrighty. Well, now that that is out of the system, who's ready for a good laugh on an exit note? Everybody? Everybody ready?
Ready.
Did you say
Alrighty.
exit node or exit note?
Note.
Oh, I heard node too.
Okay, we'll just go with node. Whatever. It's actually kind of fitting. So on the 13th, Ethereum was rolling out their Constantinople upgrade on the testnet. And it's really funny. All of the testnet nodes stalled the block before the activation because when they pushed the update, no miners actually updated. So a bunch of testnet nodes upgraded to the new version with the scheduled fork, but none of the miners on the testnet did. And so they just kept on going and left all the testnet nodes behind.
Where have we had a bug like that before? Trying to think. Oh yeah, Jeff Garzik.
Off by one. But oh man. And the funniest part is when they finally got a hold of some developers to upgrade testnet mining nodes to actually activate the fork, guess what? They had a chain split because Geth and Parity incompatibly implemented one of the Ethereum proposals that made it into this fork. So all you kids out there who like to talk about having all kinds of different implementations because mod diversity, yeah, this is what happens. You have a bunch of disparate teams not communicating properly, not cross-checking each other's work, and your chain splits in half. And the only way to really resolve that is two centralized groups, or however many groups are maintaining these different implementations, get together and decide who they're going to change things to make it compatible with. And the more implementations you have, the more confusing and the more complicated that gets. So in this case, I believe it was Parity agreed to modify their implementation to follow Geth's implementation. But in light of all of this, the entire fork is being pushed back from, I believe they were trying to do it by November this year, to next year. So, yay. Let's give it up for the dev mind share of the crypto space. Let's give it up for Ethereum.
Move back, move fast, break things.
Yeah, it works great when you're talking about billions of dollars of other people's money, doesn't it?
I bet they even break the user space.
Oh, they don't. Nodes are not for users anymore because users can't handle things. Didn't you get that memo? But yeah, I mean, it's like, how long can they keep this shit going before like this entire project just implodes on itself? I mean, like, how many bugs have just caused complete consensus failures? How many bugs have made how many millions of dollars just unspendable? Like, this like it boggles my mind that this project is still going forward. Like, the architecture is unscalable, the entire design is fundamentally broken, and it seems like the developers are almost completely incapable of changing things without breaking core features of the network.
Yeah, I mean, I saw, I can't, it's going to take me a while to scroll through it, but I'm going to paraphrase what someone said when I was tweeting out some things about Civil, especially about Joseph Lubin. And I don't know pronounce his name. I think it's Arbedout on Twitter, Arbedout. And he made a comment about how the greatest trick that Ethereum ever pulled was to make everyone believe that Italik was the leader and not Joseph Lubin, which I agree with, all things considered.
Yeah, consensus. Yep. They have a lot of shady, uncontested influence on things.
So what is the next new cool thing? Because the coolness of Ethereum is going away now. What's the next big thing? It's going
Wait.
Yeah.
When was Ethereum cool? I need to know when it was cool, because I don't remember that.
Since they got a bunch of JavaScript developers.
The world runs on JavaScript, and it's horrifying.
I think the only time that Ethereum was close to getting cool was when they did that weird badger meth dance on stage. That was about as close as they got to.
No,
that's about it.
I think that was autistic, and not in a good way.
Hey, don't use that as a pejorative.
Alrighty, though. I guess that wraps us up for the day, and it's final thoughts time. Who's got some thoughts?
GDEX.
I mean, my thought is kind of, it's belated because it's about an event that happened several or a few weeks. Well, no, now it's 2 weeks ago, but it's kind of related to the whole WikiLeaks Assange thing. But I don't know if anyone else noticed, but Parallel Polis was selling silver coins with Julian Assange's name and face on them at the event, and they were selling them as commemorative coins. And I asked someone who was there, and I believe if someone else might have asked the organizers directly, or whoever was selling these coins, whether any of the proceeds from the sale of those coins would be going to Julian Assange or to WikiLeaks, and they said no. I don't even know if they ended up doing it, but apparently they were discussing maybe sending one of the coins to Assange's mother. They also sold a golden Ross Ulbricht coin, and they were saying, well, they weren't going to send that to, Ross Ulbricht's mother, because, why would you do that? Like, you don't want to, be nice. So they were just going to send 2 Julian Assange silver coins to Assange's mother and one to Ross Ulbricht's mother, which is weird. But I find that, so insulting on so many levels. First of all, you're using you're using the names and likenesses of 2 living persons. So calling them commemorative coins is a bit really, don't use that word. They're not dead, they're alive. And 2, they both have ongoing legal funds because they are in their own ways trapped. They are being detained. Ross Ulbricht is obviously he's in the actual detention process where he's in prison, and Julian Assange is being arbitrarily detained based on the opinion of the United Nations by the UK government and by the United States, which is influencing the process of him being able to safely leave the country. So I'm still fuming about the fact that they were selling coins and not planning to donate any of the money to either of these funds. And so at this point, I don't regret not going to that event, because I feel like people who would do something like that are not worth my time. I find it really insulting to the cause. that they would think that that kind of behavior is okay. So I would say anyone who bought those coins, you should probably feel ashamed of yourself, or at least, I mean, if you didn't know that the money wasn't going to WikiLeaks, apparently some people were under the impression that the money was going to go to Julian Assange or WikiLeaks or Ross Holbrook. So if you were in any way misled about that, then that's fair. But I would seriously consider selling the coins or donating them to WikiLeaks or something like that to make up for the fact that that was a really abhorrent thing for the Parallel Polis to do. To Parallel Polis, I really recommend you don't do that again, or I am going to bring a even bigger firestorm social media wise on you than I did during the event, which was just to say, hey, this is wrong. These are living people. So this is just a reminder to anyone watching, please hold people accountable when they do things like that. And if you actually want to support those people or their causes, you should consider donating to them directly. And you just should always make sure that when merchandise is being sold, that especially in that way where it's someone's likeness and name, and that's basically the only reason it was getting sold at all, you should always try to verify whether the proceeds are actually going to the people that you claim to support.
Mm-hmm. Fuck you guys. You are fucking scumbags. All right. Nopara, got any final thought?
No, not really.
All right. Then I guess I will take us out on a shit post. So I stole this quote from Kevin Calby in the chat. This is Civil's understanding of blockchains. If I upload onion articles on the blockchain, then they become true. So thank you for the lulz, Kevin. And I guess
for the record, Kevin was one of the first person who tried Wasabi.
Woo!
Awesome. But on that note, thanks for the lulz, Kevin, and we will see you guys on Sunday. Toodaloo.
Bye.